Hi everyone, welcome back to AmplifyED, Teaching for Equity podcast. This is your host, Sam Bozin, and today I'll be analyzing two second language acquisition teaching proposals. The first proposal is called Get It Right from the Beginning, and the second is called Let's Talk. I'll compare their core ideas, how they address or overlook identity and social justice, and reflect on how I, as a changemaker teacher, would utilize each teaching proposal in my own classroom to create a more inclusive, equitable, and empowering language learning environment. Okay, so the first SLA teaching proposal is called Get It Right from the Beginning. This approach emphasizes accuracy and correct habits from the very start of learning. Lessons focus on grammar rules or syntax, rote drills, and repeated exposure and practice. In this teaching proposal, error correction occurs immediately to prevent the formation of bad habits. Now, I want to preface that bad habits is in quotes here, and that's a really important thing to consider. Because what is a bad habit and why are we framing it that way? So just keep that in mind. The Get It Right from the Beginning teaching proposal connects to the behaviorist SLA theory, where stimulus, repetition, and reinforcement are key in the language acquisition process. The goal of this teaching proposal is mastery of form before emphasis on communication, and that is an important point to remember. All right, so that's the Get It Right from the Beginning teaching proposal. The second teaching proposal is called Let's Talk, and it emphasizes meaningful interaction and communication. For this teaching proposal, learners are encouraged to use language in meaningful ways, even if they make mistakes, because it is believed that they will learn from those meaningful interactions. These interactions can take place with peers or teachers or a combination. So this proposal is grounded in interactionist SLA theory, like Long's interaction hypothesis from 1996, which argues that students acquire language best through what is called modified interactions, where negotiations of meaning, clarification requests, and authentic purposes for communicating occur. In this approach, feedback emerges more implicitly or naturally because learners notice gaps in their own understanding as they talk with peers or teachers. So, now that we have a general understanding of each teaching proposal, let's compare and contrast the two. While Get It Right from the Beginning emphasizes form-focused instruction, Let's Talk emphasizes communication and meaning making. Regarding SLA theories, Get It Right from the Beginning is grounded in the behaviorist perspective, whereas Let's Talk is more grounded in the interactionist perspective. While error correction is explicit and immediate in Get It Right from the Beginning, it's more implicit and develops naturally through communication and self-reflection or metacognition in Let's Talk. So, those are some of the key differences, but let's dig a little bit deeper. I want to talk about the key differences, not just based on the general overview I gave earlier, but also in terms of the teacher roles and the student roles within both teaching proposals, because those are really important aspects to consider as well. So, in Get It Right from the Beginning, the teacher takes on the role of the instructor, the information giver, and the feedback giver as teachers deliver explicit instruction and corrective feedback while students participate in drills and repeated practice. In the Let's Talk method, the teacher takes on the role of facilitator and co-communicator as students co-construct meaning through one-on-one or group conversations. Again, this could either be with a teacher, with peers, or a combination of both. In Get It Right from the Beginning, students are experiencing a highly structured, pre-planned, and controlled learning environment or experience. The teacher has planned out exactly what information or input is being provided to students, how student output or language production occurs, and both when and how students' errors are being corrected. On the other hand, though, in Let's Talk, students are actively engaged in an open-ended, often exploratory learning experience where the teacher has done some work to pre-plan and scaffold instruction, but where most input and output is actually just coming up naturally. At the same time, students gain feedback and insight on their habits of language use through being pushed to produce output by their peers in the Let's Talk approach. So now, all that information is great to have, but what does it look like in a real classroom? Well, within the context of a classroom, get it right from the beginning might look like a teacher introducing a grammar rule through explicit instruction. I'm thinking the I do, we do, you do process that Anita Archer talks about. So for example, in my field experience, my cooperating teacher, let's call her Mrs. T, introduces the English suffixes of ing or ing, which is the present participle or a gerund, depending upon the context, and the suffix of ed, or that could be id, d, or t, and which is the inflectional ending or past participle, again, just depending upon context. And she also introduced the rule that when we have a base word that ends with one vowel and one consonant, the ending consonant is doubled. So for an example, we have the word hug. So if our base word is hug and we add the suffix of ing, the G in hug is doubled because there's one vowel and one consonant at the end of the base word, which is U and G. H-U-G becomes H-U-G-G-I-N-G with two G's, hugging. The same goes for the ED ending, where hug becomes hugged, H-U-G-G-E-D. Mrs. T explicitly and directly explained this concept to students. She explained that with hugging, students can tap out the syllables to hear the two G sounds, hug-ging. Then she modeled how to do this same process with a different word. That's the I do of explicit instruction. After that, Mrs. T and the students did some process work together, which is the we do portion of his explicit instruction. And then finally, students worked on adding the suffixes to the base words on their own using a worksheet, while Mrs. T circulated to provide explicit error correction in the moment. This would be called the I do step of explicit instruction when students apply it on their own. Now, Mrs. T provided explicit feedback verbally and on the students' worksheets. For example, she said to one student, "No, that's wrong. The P needs to be doubled in ripping because the rule says we double the consonant when the base word ends with one vowel and one consonant." When we say the word ripping by breaking up the syllable, we hear the P twice. Rip, ping. If you don't double the P, then we have the word riping, which is not correct. So that's kind of what the get it right from the beginning might look like in a real classroom. But by contrast with within the context of a classroom, Let's Talk might look like a teacher starting a whole class discussion or partner talk about what students did over the weekend, like I walked the dog, or I played on the playground. Those are things students might talk about. And then also what students are doing this week currently, like I am learning or I am cutting paper. Again, those are two examples of what students might say. The teacher can write what students say on the board, like if you have a whiteboard, smartboard, and then the teacher might write those words like walked, played, hugged, learning, running, cutting, etc. The teacher might ask the students, what do you notice about the spelling of these words? And students might notice the ED ending or the ING ending, or even the double consonant rule, or maybe even a combination of the three. And then the teacher might have the students get into partnered conversations about picture cards. So the teacher would provide picture cards. And for example, two students may look at a card of a girl hugging her dog. The teacher might facilitate the student conversation by asking, what is happening now? And the students might say, a girl is hugging her dog. Then the teacher might ask, well, what happened yesterday? If this is the same picture, what happened yesterday? And the students might say, a girl hugged her dog. Then students might be prompted to compare ideas with another group where they can notice which consonants were doubled and which ones were not doubled. For example, if another group had a picture card with a boy painting, the consonant wouldn't be doubled. So the students can naturally engage in conversation with each other to discover the patterns, while the teacher circulates the room to facilitate conversation and prompt students with questions like, what is the difference about the consonants in hugged and painted? So this guided noticing promotes grammar learning through what I would consider student-centered conversation. And then finally, the teacher might bring the whole class back to the board to discuss and form a rule as a group, like when a base word ends in one vowel plus one consonant, we double the consonant before adding ED or ING. And this might be a rule that they come up with together and they put, on an anchor chart in the classroom. And the class can also come up with examples throughout the discussion that the teacher may write on the board, like hug turns into hugged and hugging with two G's in the medial consonants. Jog becomes jogged or jogging, again with the double consonant. But paint becomes painted and painting, where there's no double consonant because the medial consonants are N and T, which is two consonants in a row, so we don't need to double it. So they may include some examples, and the students may, discuss the rule or discuss what they did and come up with it all together collaboratively. The teacher may even end the lesson by praising the students' collaboration, the discovery of the rules, and their overall communication. Because again, in the Let's Talk approach, the overall goal is communication and fluency. So just kind of review the key difference between Get It Right from the Beginning and Let's Talk. And Get It Right from the beginning, it focuses on control. It focuses on habit formation and correct form. This is form-based instruction. Whereas Let's Talk focuses on authentic interaction, meaningful communication, and overall fluency. So the key similarity between these two is that they are both teaching proposals that aim for communicative competence and fluency of the learners. However, they take really opposite routes to getting to this eventual goalpost. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, it wouldn't be the AmplifyED Teaching for Equity podcast if we didn't consider identity and social justice, as these two teaching approaches have very different implications for CLD students and just learning in general. So what I notice is that Get It Right from the Beginning can unintentionally reinforce linguistic hierarchies that contribute to educational inequities, and especially for CLD students. So that's something to think about. The proposal values standard, and that's in quotes, or native, again, in quotes, forms of English, which have often been privileged by dominant groups, while framing CLD learners and their linguistic accents, dialects, and rules and usage as quote-unquote incorrect. Students who come from multilingual backgrounds may feel that their linguistic identities are either being judged or completely forsaken, completely erased. So social justice may be overlooked in Get It Right from the Beginning because the approach often centers on correctness rather than communication or inclusion. That being said, there may be ways to utilize this teaching approach that intentionally center equity, but I'll get to that in just a minute. So now, when I'm looking at Let's Talk, what I notice, on the other hand, is that it often validates student voices and promotes linguistic diversity. This approach prioritizes communication over form-based instruction, and it gives learners the freedom to express themselves fully, using translanguaging as they wish, making mistakes at times and reflecting on those mistakes, or even noticing the mistakes just generally, and utilizing different types of accents or dialects. So students can draw on their entire linguistic repertoires, and that's really important and an essential part of this approach. Since this approach supports translanguaging and recognizes that meaning making is more important than being quote unquote perfect, Let's Talk can actually promote social justice in learning. That being said, it is still important for teachers to thoughtfully plan for and manage in the moment the power dynamics in peer-to-peer discussions, because sometimes native English speakers or more confident speakers can dominate these conversations. And we want to make sure that CLD learners are not left out of the conversations because their voice is equally as important. So now I want to talk about what we can do as educators to create actionable, positive change in our classrooms. Speaking personally as a self-identified change-maker educator, something I talk about on my podcast a lot, my goal is to create what I would say the pop sensation Hannah Montana might call the best of both worlds. I want to cultivate a classroom that values both communication and correctness or accuracy, while also centering identity and equity to foster an inclusive language learning environment for all students. So here are just a few ideas of how I would do this in my own classroom. Now, please remember this is a non-exhaustive list, and I'm just one person with one perspective. So take this, think about it, learn from it, utilize it if it helps you. But again, this is just some ideas to get you started and to get you thinking about what you may want to include in your own classroom. So first, I would build fluency and confidence through the Let's Talk approach. I would design interactive and communicative tasks like partner interviews, debates, and opinion conversations, retelling a story, etc. So, for example, I might have students share a family tradition, a special holiday, or a special celebration that their family or community does. And they can use both the L1 and the L2. And this honors and places value on their cultural and linguistic backgrounds while building authentic communication skills with their peers. Then I would facilitate students as needed and provide implicit feedback. And that's implicit mostly, like, for example, recasts or clarification requests. I would ask probing questions to the students so that they can share what they feel comfortable sharing and explain further. And this will create an environment, hopefully, that has a low effective filter and promotes comprehensible input and output, since students, again, just get to share in a peer-to-peer conversation that is both contextualized and culturally responsive. Then I might utilize form-focused instruction strategically to use the get right approach. So after the students have the discussions, I might guide short mini lessons where we talk about grammar forms and rules, where I model using the rules, and then where students have, ample time to practice the rules. For example, after students share their family traditions, I might explicitly explain past tense verbs that came up naturally in their conversation using maybe the ED ending. So I would model the rule, and then the students would be able to practice applying that rule using either a worksheet or retelling their partner's story about family traditions, or maybe a bit of both. But the key is providing ample practice, lots of repeated exposure, lots of practice. And this would help students see the value of grammatical accuracy without silencing their unique voices. So I'm using the form-focused instruction, but I'm applying culturally relevant content and placing value on their unique cultural and linguistic backgrounds to teach the unique grammar forms and the rules. So finally, I would foster inclusion by incorporating student choice in the topics we discuss, by letting them, bring their cultures and experiences into the lessons, as I just said, and again, through the use of translanguaging, because translanguaging is so powerful. I would purposely and intentionally pre-plan groups so that students can work with their common L1s, and at the same time, I would create groups that have mixed abilities or mixed readiness levels so that more confident speakers can push more timid speakers to produce output. This correlates to the ZPD, or Vygotsky's Zone of Proximal Development from 1978, which again is the gap between what a learner can do independently and what they can achieve with guidance from a more knowledgeable person. This could be a peer, a teacher, anything in between. And this is where we want learners to be. We want them to be in the ZPD, and we want to move them up and up and up and up, and provide scaffolds, gradually release, and then eventually they can take ownership of their learning and become independent thinkers. So finally, I would encourage peer feedback circles because I feel like they're really helpful and effective. I've seen them in my field experience, and I see that they really do work when intentionally and thoughtfully planned. Because I want to emphasize meaning first and reinforce collaboration and empathy in my classroom. So that's kind of what I would do. And I think by blending structure and explicit instruction with natural communication and culturally responsive activities, my classroom would hopefully become a place where linguistic diversity is celebrated and where every learner's voice is really, truly valued. So, in conclusion, the get it right from the beginning approach, yes, it builds accuracy, but at what cost for students and their identities? I mean, that's something to really think about. Let's talk builds connection, on the other hand, but accuracy may need to come into play at some point. So that's, again, something to think about. So listeners, as changemaker educators yourselves, I really urge you to consider a more holistic approach, supporting accuracy, but never at the expense of identity, confidence, or belonging. And, at the end of the day, true language learning happens when students feel safe, seen, and supported by both their teachers and their peers. And when they feel free to take risks because they're working in a low anxiety learning environment where they feel like they can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, where they can find their voices and where they can take ownership of their education to become lifelong learners. Again, this is Sam Bozin with the AmplifyED Teaching for Equity podcast. It's been a pleasure. Please join me again next week where I'll be interviewing two renowned school librarians about creating more inclusive classroom libraries that create mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors for all students. This episode is proudly sponsored by Dr. Andrew Walton and the School of Education at MSU Denver. For more details and information, please go to msudenver.edu/education. This is Sam Bozin. Have a beautiful day, and let's amplify ed.